Well, in fact, you do say that perfectionism is not about striving for excellence. What is it?
That was really, as a recovering perfectionist, that was really interesting to me. I think perfectionism is all about what will people think. Perfectionism is very externally defined. And, I call it the 20-ton shield. We carry this, we use perfectionism as a way to protect ourselves. The idea is, hey, look, if I look perfect, work perfect, and do it all perfectly, I can avoid being criticized and blamed and judged. And the truth is that you can't avoid those experiences because they're part of the human experience. But what that shield does is it keeps us from being seen. And I don't think that we can ever be in meaningful relationship with people when they can't see us. And so to me, perfectionism is very much about protection. I realized before this work kind of knocked me on my butt that I was not willing to try anything that I wasn't already good at. And so if someone would say, hey, do you want to come try this yoga class? And I'm like, no. And like, well, I'll rent a DVD and I'll practice it in my living room until I'm awesome and then I'll go. As opposed to just show up. And if you fall over, you fall over.
What was it that attracted you to this type of work?
This is the ironic part. I was getting my master's degree in social work and I got to the end of it and I thought, oh my God, I hate this. Like, are you kidding me? Like, I became a social worker because I've got awesome advice. I know exactly what people need to be doing to get their lives together. And it has nothing to do with giving advice. It's like being with people on their journey. I was like, oh my God, I can't do that. That is really mushy. So I decided to become a researcher because there was no vulnerability in it. It's data. It's either good, bad, right, wrong, 0, 1. And then you can imagine the irony when, 7 years into my research, I find that vulnerability is the central, most important thing to people who are living wholehearted, which is a term I use to explain people who have the capacity to wake up in this crazy culture of perfection and scarcity and say, you know what, I'm enough.
That's an interesting point. What have been the most challenging areas for you in your work on a personal level?
I think that vulnerability, the willingness to show up and be seen when there are no guarantees, was really hard for me. The parenting piece was borderline devastating for me. The idea that we can't give children what we don't have, which, like I've got a 14-year-old daughter and I can look at her every day and say, your body's beautiful and it doesn't matter what people look like on TV, it's all, crap. I can say that to her every day. But what really matters and what really shapes how she feels and thinks about herself is the relationship I have with my body. I can't raise a daughter who loves her body more than I love my body. I can't raise a son who is more resilient than I am resilient. So the idea that it's not what we know about parenting, but who we are, was really a call to arms for me.
The first TED Talk you did was, on the power of vulnerability, and it was wildly popular. I think it had over 10 million views and went viral. In that, you talk about a breakdown.
Yeah.
What was the breakdown? What was the crisis?
Well, when vulnerability emerged as, critically important to wholeheartedness, which I was really interested in studying because I wanted some of that. I wanted some of that I'm enoughness. I'm 47, and I guess that happened in, I was 45. At some point, you get sick of hustling for your worthiness, perfecting, performing, pleasing. It's exhausting. Mm-hmm. So I was really excited. Then when I found out that I had to be vulnerable in order to get it, I really put the data away and went and found a therapist. And I actually went to the therapist with like a checklist, a little spreadsheet. Mm-hmm. I was like, here's what came out from the data, and I think I need this. I have 6 weeks, and let's not get any kind of childhood BS in here. Just hit me with some tips. She was like, have a seat. I was like, oh. So, she called it a spiritual awakening. I called it a breakdown. I think spiritual awakening sounds better, but I had a breakdown. And I think part of it was very much about the midlife thing for me.
Did it mean you couldn't do your work, you couldn't operate? How did it manifest itself though?
No, I had anxiety attacks for the first time. So every time I would go into like people pleasing mode and running around because someone was coming over to pick up, PTO's permission slips, I'd start cleaning, and then I'd have these debilitating anxiety attacks. It was like my body was saying, look, you can keep hustling, we're done. And so it was a street fight, for me with vulnerability. And as I've said before, I lost, but I got my life back. And I think I came out of the other side of it with a clear understanding that how I feel and my life with the people I love is more important than what other people think.
Why do you think that, we as human beings have such issues with vulnerability when intellectually we know that we all experience it and it's part of the human condition? Why do we have such problems with it?
Well, it's an important question. I think the biggest issue is there's so much mythology about vulnerability. I don't think you have to be a fifth generation,
No.
pistol-toting Texan, to think that vulnerability is weakness. I think most of us were raised that way. And the truth is, when we asked people, what is vulnerability? We got thousands of answers. And they were things like the first date after my divorce, trying to get pregnant after my second miscarriage, sitting with my wife who has stage 4 breast cancer and making plans for our young children, starting my own business, saying I love you first. And the thing that was I have about maybe 12, 13,000 pieces of data at this point, because this is my 13th year doing this. I cannot find a single example of courage that is not completely defined by vulnerability. So this myth that vulnerability is weakness keeps us afraid, when the truth is, vulnerability is our greatest measure of courage. A great example that I think everyone can relate to is you have a friend or a family, someone that you care about go through something really tragic, and you have to call. And you look at the phone and you think, that's what vulnerability feels like. What am I going to say? It's uncertainty, it's emotional exposure, I'm not comfortable. And so you look at the phone and you're like, I'll call in an hour. And then an hour goes by and it's the next day. And you're like, you know what? They've probably got family there. I'll wait a couple of days. Then you run into that person a month later at the market. And what does that feel like? It feels like shame. It's terrible. But if you pick up the phone and stumble through the conversation, and you can't make it better, all you can say is, I care about you and I'm here with you, and you hang up, you feel courageous. You feel like that was awkward and terrible, but I'm completely aligned with my values and I did the right thing. And that's what vulnerability is.